Once World War II officially ends, America tries to reach normalcy. There is a sudden growth in technology and a boost in culture and entertainment. Politically, our nation is strong, and economically, we are at a rise. This time is a new beginning for America. The 1950s.
Get ready now, go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoe.
Which was very chaotic, and everybody was sort of living in an upheaval time. And during the 50s, I think they wanted stability.
Of the many new beginnings in the 50s, a major innovative topic was music, more specifically rock and roll.
I roll over Beethoven, they're rocking in 2 by 2.
Elvis Presley, also known as the King, significantly impacted culture, style, and especially music. Carl Perkins is another famous rock and roll musician. His song, Blue Suede Shoes, later became well known because of Elvis. Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins joined Elvis, and together they made the $1 Million Quartet.
Well, yeah, that was like rock and roll. That was very good. It was lively.
And then in the mid-50s, he started with rock and roll. So I think the kids liked the rock and roll. The adults hated it.
Another new beginning of the 1950s was the innovation in fashion. Christian Dior's new look changed fashion completely. Dior's new look created the hourglass figure in women's fashion. It was a huge transition from the uniform, uptight style of World War II. Fashion was greatly influenced by the culture and entertainment of the 1950s. It was because of television, films, magazines, and the rock and roll scene that created a new group of consumers known as teenagers. The main look for teenage boys was greasers. Greasers were emulating actor Marlon Brando's look from the film The Wild One in 1953. More teenage fashion icons of the 1950s were Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and Audrey Hepburn.
Sort of a change with some of the teenagers. The word teenager actually developed, I think, in the 50s, more or less. And teenagers started to rebel a little bit, and you had Elvis Presley. Ever hear of him? Elvis Presley, he came around in the mid-50s and sort of shook up things.
The film industry was another component of the new beginnings in the 50s. Blackboard Jungle was the first major Hollywood film to have a rock and roll song in its soundtrack, Rock Around the Clock.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock, we're gonna rock.
More popular movies at the time were Singing in the Rain with Gene Kelly, All About Eve with Bette Davis and Ann Baxter, Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis, and Funny Face with Audrey Hepburn. In addition, in 1954, Walt Disney achieved a milestone as the individual with the most Oscar wins in one year, taking home 4 that night. And Dorothy Dandridge was the first African-American woman ever nominated for an Academy Award.
They're great movies.
And so the movie stars were wonderful.
Before the 50s, television was simply television. It wasn't until the 50s that television became a form of mass media. It was then that entertainment tremendously changed. People began switching from their radios to TVs, and the popular radio shows needed to be televised. In addition, TV advertisements came out with this new popular form of broadcasting.
And the fact that you could see and hear things from all over it wasn't all over the world yet, because they didn't really have a way of showing things overseas, but that you could see like another city or another state. So I watched television a lot.
And color
We
movies.
had one of the first television sets, a black and white television. It was a small screen like that with a big magnifying glass in the front of it, so that it would look bigger. It was black and white.
Although TV was ultimately good for the public, it was bad for the film industry. Because people were consumed by their television sets at home, there was no need to go out and check out the big screen. Not only was there a stay-at-home advantage, but television was free. Hollywood began to develop ways to put a stop to the gains of TV, such as increasing the use of color and introducing widescreen films. To additionally outdo TV, 3D films were invented. To counteract Hollywood's gains, color TV was created. Basically, every year during the 50s, there was a new invention to be fascinated with. Color television was invented to ultimately benefit the rise of TV in the 50s. Another invention of the 50s was the credit card, a plastic card that eliminated the need to carry cash. Therefore, people began exploring the many possibilities of what they could do with their money. A more technological invention was the hovercraft, which was created in 1956 by Christopher Crockerwell. By moving over water surfaces, the hovercraft reduced friction, which is why it was often used in the Army. The first successful polio vaccine was developed, tested, and refined by Jonas Salk. This invention prevented many cases of polio all over the world.
It saved a lot of kids from getting polio.
Right.
Very worried about polio. Was particularly in the mid-50s, early 50s. A lot of kids developed polio, and it was a big sort of scare. So when this came about, it was everybody wanted to get it.
There are many notable, well-known figures from the 50s. This includes Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and George Catlett Marshall. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the whites-only section of a bus. Her incident set the civil rights movement in motion. So did Malcolm X, an African-American Muslim minister who began speaking about the cruelty of racism. Although many people view him as a violent person, today he is known as one of the most influential African-American advocates. George Catlett Marshall is acknowledged for being an outstanding war general. He was also the president of the American Red Cross Association, which contributed to his Nobel Peace Prize in 1953. In addition to the many positive beginnings, the 50s was also when paranoia over communism began in the U.S. During the post-war period, Truman faced the expansion of communism and tried to help governments struggling to resist it. This later became known as the Truman Doctrine. Senator McCarthy developed McCarthyism, which was a hunt for people who, according to McCarthy, were communists. This created even more fear than before. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War began. It was a war between the communist and non-communist, or North and South Korea. America intervened and joined the South Korean side. Finally, on June 17, 1953, a treaty of sort was signed. To prevent more conflicts around the world, the United Nations was created and based in New York City. Contrary to the conflicts, there were many successes in America during the 50s. It was at this point when the space race between Russia and the U.S. began. They both felt extremely threatened by each other technologically and were competing to be the first to make it to space. America eventually made it to space, but Russia was first. In addition to this, America gained 2 more states in 1959, Alaska and Hawaii. Sports are another example of beginnings in the 50s. Tenley Albright, the figure skater, won the Olympic gold medal in 1956. Afterwards, she attended Harvard Medical School and became a surgeon. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile on May 6, 1954. This was not only a major physical barrier that was broken, but a psychological one too. Before him, scientists and doctors believed that it was impossible. In addition, Sports Illustrated was created to provide a weekly source of sports news and photographs. The 1950s were a time of beginnings, introductions, and firsts. It was a decade of the rebirth of a nation, a decade in which everything started to develop and change, a decade that will never be forgotten.
Go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoe. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoe. You can knock me down, step in my face, slander my name all over the place. Do anything that you want to do, but baby, lay off of my shoes. Don't you step on my blue suede shoe.